Decoding history. Analyzing power. Power Politics Review.
We're going to break down exactly how a conflict in just 48 hours brought the world's economy to its knees. It's a huge lesson in just how fragile the connections holding our world together really are. And to really get how fast this all happened, check out this quote from the market analysis firm Kepler. They put this out right in the middle of the chaos. This is no longer a geopolitical risk premium in the abstract. Supply is being disrupted in real time. That's the key right there. This wasn't some far-off what-if scenario anymore. No, this was happening right now. The threat wasn't on the horizon, it had kicked down the front door. So how on earth did we get here? Let's trace the steps. It all started with a series of events that escalated with, honestly, terrifying speed. It was like watching dominoes fall, but on a global scale. This timeline, it's just wild how fast things fell apart. On February 28th, you have the initial joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran. Retaliation came almost instantly. But the real game changer, the move that sent shockwaves everywhere, was on March 1st. It wasn't just the attacks on infrastructure, though that was bad enough. It was the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. In less than 48 hours, that single move put the entire world's energy supply on a knife's edge. Now, to really understand the global panic that followed, we have to zoom in on that one narrow stretch of water. And calling it the world's energy artery, that is not an exaggeration. Geographically, sure, it's the only way for ships to get out of the Persian Gulf, but economically, it's way, way more than that. Think of it as the planet's main artery for energy. It's the tiny bottleneck where a massive portion of the world's energy has to squeeze through every single day. Let's put a number on that. Almost a third of all crude oil that travels by sea passes through this one little choke point. Just let that sink in for a second. Shutting down the Strait of Hormuz is like turning off the tap for nearly a third of the world's oil supply. Just like that. And, this wasn't just about crude oil. We're talking about liquefied natural gas, LNG. About 20% of the world's supply from Qatar comes through here. For Europe, this was a nightmare. Suddenly, up to 40% of their jet fuel was at risk. But for a country like India, it was even worse. A staggering 85% of their liquefied petroleum gas, the gas millions of people use every single day for cooking and heating, was suddenly in real jeopardy. And here's the kicker. Iran didn't even need a massive naval fleet to enforce this blockade. The risk alone was enough. Insurance companies immediately pulled coverage for any ships going through the area. And without insurance, commercial shipping just stops. It's economically impossible. So the strait was effectively closed, even without being physically sealed off. So you've got this vital choke point slammed shut. What happens next? Absolute chaos. An instant and brutal shockwave that just ripped through global financial markets. The first and most obvious thing was the price of oil. Brent crude, that's the global benchmark, it surged by 13% in a matter of days. We're talking a jump from around $70 a barrel to over 82. The markets weren't just nervous, they were immediately pricing in a catastrophic supply shortage. And when oil skyrockets, what happens to stocks? Yep, they plummet. The Dow Jones dropped over 400 points as investors just ran for the exits. The fear was that soaring energy costs would cripple businesses, crush consumers, and maybe even tip the whole global economy into a recession. And the ripples just kept spreading out. Airspace closures led to over 4,000 flight cancellations a day. In Europe, natural gas prices basically doubled overnight. Panicked investors piled into gold, the classic safe haven asset, sending its price soaring. And over in Asia, South Korea's stock market had its worst day since the 2008 financial crisis. This was no longer a regional problem. This was full-blown global panic. But this crisis went way beyond a bad week on the stock market. It triggered something much deeper, a sort of geopolitical earthquake. It started a fundamental redrawing of the global energy map, forcing some huge realignments. I mean, talk about a complete 180. This slide shows just how dramatically the world was turned on its head. Just a few months before, the World Bank was talking about an oversupplied oil market, weak demand, and prices falling to $60 a barrel. Flash forward to March 2026, and we're in a massive supply shock with panic demand and prices shooting past 80. The old reality was just gone. To see why this shift happened, you've got to look at China, the world's biggest energy importer. Before all this went down, more than a third of its crude oil came from Iran and other countries that had to ship through the Strait of Hormuz. When that supply was suddenly at risk, Beijing had to make a really critical choice, and fast. And that choice was pretty clear. Pivot, hard, towards Russia. With their main energy sources under threat, both China and India scrambled to deepen their reliance on Russian oil. And for Moscow? Well, this was a golden opportunity. Suddenly, two of the planet's biggest energy consumers were knocking on their door, which gave them immense economic leverage and strategic power on the world stage. So you might be thinking, hold on, what about OPEC Plus? Can't they just open the taps and pump more oil? Well, they were caught in a three-part trap. First, their spare capacity was pretty limited. Second, the countries that did have that spare capacity, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, were literally the ones being attacked. But the third point is the real killer. Even if they could pump more oil, it wouldn't matter. The oil was trapped. With the Strait of Hormuz closed, there was no way to get it to the global market. OPEC Plus, the world's supposed swing producer, was completely powerless. And all of that leaves us with a really critical question. This crisis exposed just how incredibly fragile our global supply chains are. It showed us how one single point of failure can threaten the entire system. It really forces us to ask, are we ready for the next time a regional spark ignites a global choke point? And what, if anything, can be done to build a world that's a little less fragile?